Support for the statewide broadcast of The State of Ohio comes from Medical Mutual, providing more than 1.4 million Ohioans peace of mind with a selection of health insurance plans. Online at medmutual.com/Ohio. By the law offices of Porter, Wright, Morris, and Arthur, LLP. Now with 8 locations across the country, Porter Wright is a legal partner with a new perspective to the business community. More at porterwright.com. And from the Ohio Education Association, representing 124,000 members who work to inspire their students to think creatively and experience the joy of learning. Online at ohea.org.
The voices of Ohio voters who could play big roles in deciding what happens in this election. This week on a special 2020 election edition of The State of Ohio. Welcome to the State of Ohio. I'm Karen Kassler. Polls show and experts say Ohio is a toss-up between Republican President Donald Trump and his Democratic challenger, former Vice President Joe Biden. Many experts had suggested at the beginning of this year that was unlikely. This week we feature the voices of voters who will be key to whatever happens on election night, just a few days away. Let's start with women. In 2016, Trump lost the overall women's vote. However, he won with white women and with white women without college degrees. Polls show this year the Trump gender gap has widened from around 11 points in 2016 to 14 points in the latest Quinnipiac poll of Ohio voters. And Biden is leading with women by much more than that in key states such as Michigan and Wisconsin. State House correspondent Joe Ingles talked to several women voters from around the state.
Suburban women, will you please like me? Remember? Please. I saved your damn neighborhood, okay?
His view of suburban women is absolutely ridiculous and outdated. You know, I'm an African-American woman. I live in the suburbs.
I believe our current president is, in his description of suburban women, is a bit antiquated. The suburbs are much more diverse than what he would have us believe.
And I really do think in his head he has this stereotype of a suburban woman. And I think it actually is very insulting to our intelligence because, you know, I see him lie again and again about things that are just blatantly obvious. And he keeps repeating them and like expecting that we're just buying into that. And it's, you know, it's just kind of crazy.
Hello, you've reached 911. I'm sorry that there is no one here to answer your emergency call, but leave a message.
President Trump has spoken specifically to suburban women in his latest rallies, and for months he's used ads like this one to tell women he's the one who will keep them safe. But that message is not resonating with some of them.
Diverse. We have, friends from different backgrounds and different skin color living next door to us. So the implications that are not veiled that he's throwing out there, that are suburban homes and neighborhoods are suddenly going to become dangerous because Black and brown-skinned people are going to infiltrate. I mean, that's just nonsense.
But Trump's message hits home for some suburban women who have been supportive of his policies, such as Deidre Bingley, who moved to Delaware from Texas, where she said unauthorized immigration made her former hometown unsafe.
I've just seen what it does to otherwise, middle-class communities where people move out of the cities to try to get away from crime, and that just kind of comes in and takes over.
Trump's law and order message also appeals to Cindy Patrick of Delaware, who plans to vote for Trump the second time around.
My husband's a retired police chief. The law enforcement was a big deal to me. Him supporting law enforcement is a huge deal to me. My husband, like I said, just retired. I thank God every day he is retired right now.
While Patrick and Bingley want to re-elect Trump, some women who helped put him in office in 2016 say they'll vote for Biden this time around. And they emphasize they're voting for Biden and not just against Trump. That includes Erin Rosiello, who went from voting for Trump to running as a Democrat in a long-shot race against incumbent Republican State Representative Scott Lips.
And, we want to protect our families, not from each other. We want to protect our families from COVID. We want to protect our families with health insurance and good education, and not from each other.
I had a lot of time to look into stuff and really, at the same time, the whole pandemic's happening, the George Floyd thing is happening, where's protests, Black Lives Matter. And I just something in my soul, I remember sitting and just crying and being how do we change this? How can I, this is a bad world for my kid to grow up in.
I was a lifelong Republican, raised by very, very strong Republicans. And this year, for sure, I'm voting for Joe Biden.
Though they're not as public about it, there are some flips the other way, too.
I am a happy, proud supporter of our president.
Representative Bernadine Kennedy Kent, who hasn't been at the State House in more than a year and a half because of a dispute with House Democrats, recently spoke at an event to elect Trump. She says she believes he's willing to work across the aisle to deal with big problems. The two candidates campaign differently. While Biden holds smaller campaign events in COVID-safe environments or hosts drive-ins where people can stay in their cars at safe distances, Trump holds large rallies that attract large numbers of attendees packed together, mostly without masks. He was in Circleville this past weekend.
He disgusts people. I think that people see him as a liar, someone who lies regularly, and people don't respect that, no matter what you're lying about. I think that they find him offensive. And lately, in the last few weeks, suburban women are just offended by him because I think that they see that he thinks we're dumb, he's so condescending in some of the comments he's made. So I think that there's an embarrassment that he's our president.
But some of Trump's supporters say they look beyond his harsher side.
Well, the things that he says don't particularly attract me to him because I'm one of the people that wishes that there are things that he would just be quiet about. I mean, that's just a fact. On the other hand, I think it's refreshing that we have a president who does not guard what he says. He literally says what he's thinking, so you don't have to worry about what his ulterior motives are. He literally says what he's thinking, which sometimes is a good thing and sometimes is not a good thing. But that, to me, is he's being honest.
With the gender gap as large as it is, and with some Ohio suburbs turning blue in 2018, suburban women could decide the presidency this year.
Well, they appear to be a swing group, a group that were dependably Republican, or at least a clear majority of them in the past, particularly college-educated suburban women. And beginning really in 2018, but then again headed into the 2020 election, they appear to be swinging majorities of them towards Joe Biden. And whether that's a permanent shift or something that is temporary, kind of a Trump effect, I guess we will see in the future. But for right now, they are very much a group that the Democrats are relying upon, not only to vote for Biden, but to vote down ticket for Democratic candidates for Congress, for state legislature.
Paul Beck says polling shows while suburban women are leaning toward Biden, they're not voting for him in larger numbers seen in some other states. So he says Trump needs to come in stronger in rural areas than he did in 2016 to offset the projected loss of many suburban women in 2020. Joe Ingles, State House News Bureau.
Let's turn now to the rural vote in Ohio. 62% of rural Americans voted for Trump 4 years ago, according to exit polls conducted by the New York Times.
Ohio's farmland was Trump land in 2016. And while things may be different in 2020, it's clear Trump's 8-point victory came from winning 80 counties in Ohio, including Clinton County, where Roger Weinmiller and his cousin have a 3,400-acre grain farm. Like 74% of voters in Clinton County, Weinmiller voted for Trump in 2016, though he admits he wasn't a fan but liked his business background.
And I have always thought and felt for many years that this country needs to be run as a business, not on politics. And through his 4 years in office, I have gained a whole lot of respect for him. I'm very happy with all the things that he stands for and that he has done for this country.
When he's not farming, Roger dotes on his 8 goats. His story is well known here. He lost a daughter and son to opioid overdoses in 2016. His surviving son is in recovery, and Roger spends time speaking to and working with those struggling with addiction. And lately, Roger's also been participating in Trump parades, featuring fans driving trucks, cars, and semis decked out with flags, banners, and other memorabilia on freeways and country roads. Jeff Magar runs a 3,000-acre farm with his daughter in Ashtabula County, also growing soybeans and corn. He has a few cows and hogs as well. He said Trump's late 2016 visit to his county, which Trump won by nearly 19 points, meant something to people who felt their voices and values weren't being heard.
In the rural community, for the last 10, 15 years, we felt our voices weren't being heard. Trump came to Ashtabula County 4 years ago. It's a little, a president hasn't ever been in this county, that type of thing. And with the farmers, 99% of the farmers I talk to feel that he has our back and hears our voice.
Across the state, Chris Gibbs farms 560 acres in Shelby and Logan counties, growing corn, soybeans, and alfalfa. He and his son also manage a small cattle farm. Gibbs didn't just vote for Trump in 2016. He was the Shelby County Republican Party chair. He had some concerns about Trump, but in 2018, when Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum from most countries and launched a trade war with China, that was it for Gibbs.
Farmers buy things made out of steel and aluminum. That's what we buy. So that hurt my bottom line. And right off the bat, then we lost, in the soybean complex alone, we lost 20% of our value because we lost the China trade. So I ended up off of the Trump train at that point, and I've been speaking out against the president's trade policies and other policies ever since.
On the other side of the tariff issue is Jeff Magar, who says Trump is fighting a battle that should have been settled years ago, and Roger Weinmiller, who admits he wasn't happy with the tariffs at first.
It's not all about us. It's about the country. And unfortunately, whenever you do things, not everybody is going to break the benefits for actions that somebody does, whatever it may be. So this time it happens to be us that we have to take it on the chin, the lower prices for the trade deal, but I would much rather do that and have someone that will stand up to China than I would to have a president that is weak and caves to China and just lets them to constantly take advantage of us like they have for decades.
Tariffs are a reason Charlie Beck opposes Trump, though he didn't vote for him in 2016 either. Beck grows corn and soybeans with his father, uncle, and some cousins on 2,100 acres outside of Defiance, in a county Trump won by nearly 35 points.
If he gets reelected, there's nothing to say that he's not going to come back on with a stronger and try to strong arm with the tariffs more than what he has in the past. And but no, believe me, everybody felt the tariffs, but I didn't really see the support waver. I mean, they were behind him 100%. The ones that weren't, they definitely went the other way, but they were pretty few and far between. So, tariffs are so frustrating because China isn't paying the tariffs. We're paying the tariffs. It's just, but that's not what he said. Is he said China's going to pay the tariffs, and that's what a lot of people believe.
Beck says he's also concerned about climate change and coronavirus. The pandemic is a big issue in rural Ohio as people worry about the future of health insurance and the economy. Beck says the wives of all his farming partners have jobs off the farm. That's the situation for Christy Luschek, a friend of Roger Weinmiller's and a fellow Trump parade participant. She and her husband are part-time farmers in Highland County, where 76% of voters picked Trump. She's an RN who works as a health insurance company case manager. Her husband runs a trucking company. Luschek says the insults and attacks on women Trump is accused of are outweighed by her support for his policies and optimism for his re-election.
We all have a past. When I got my job, did anybody say, oh, well, you did this in the past, so now I'm not going to hire you? I don't care. I don't care what he did. All I know is that he's been a great president, and I'm voting for him, and I'm hoping and praying that he gets in for another 4 years, and our economy will definitely be on the rise.
While support for Trump is likely to continue to be strong in rural Ohio, there are a few signs there are some votes for Biden here as well. Chris Gibbs officially left the Republican Party last year, but hasn't left politics. He briefly considered an independent run against right-wing Republican Congressman Jim Jordan this year. A few months ago, he joined in the launch of Operation Grant, which is affiliated with the national high-profile and big money-raising Lincoln Project, an effort to convince fellow frustrated Republicans to vote for Biden. And Gibbs is also on the board of Rural America 2020, working against what it calls misguided policies that have left rural Americans behind.
I'm a black sheep in the agriculture community, and that's fine. I find as a black sheep, my pasture is a whole lot less crowded that way.
Trump's rural backers talk up their support for him on social issues such as abortion. And many also say they don't trust Biden on the economy, which they fear will veer towards socialism, or on racial issues. In many rural counties in Ohio, more than 90% of the population is white. That's not the case in Ohio's urban areas, which went overwhelmingly for Democrat Hillary Clinton in 2016. Her 8 county wins were in Ohio's most populous and diverse areas. Exit polls for CNN showed black voters favored Clinton by 89%, Latino voters by 66%, and Asian voters by 65%. Democrats in Ohio say they're working to hang on to those voters, while Republicans have been hoping to make dents in those margins. State House correspondent Andy Chow reports.
You like a Democratic sample ballot? You guys like a Democratic sample ballot?
Daniel Shepard is spending his afternoon on this chilly, rainy Monday handing out sample ballots for the Democratic Party.
You guys need ballots?
As thousands of people line up at the early voting center in Franklin County, Shepard, a Joe Biden supporter, wants to make sure every voter has a chance to have this sample ballot in their hands.
Trump has used a far-right platform as a way to gain, for political gain. And I feel now is the only opportunity to stop him.
Shepard of Columbus says there are 3 main issues that stick out in this presidential race: income inequality, racial tension, and what he calls an overall acceptance of division. Shepard says racial tension and inequality are issues people of color have faced for centuries. However, he says the rhetoric and actions of President Donald Trump makes this election different.
I think he's using it as a tool to further his agenda. And I think that is destructive because you're empowering individuals who has the guns and the resources to capitalize on his racism.
But you'll hear a much different message at this rally in Westerville, just 10 miles north of the early voting center, where people are gathered for the Black Voices for Trump event at the campaign's headquarters. Trump supporter Kelly Clark of Lithopolis says she's excited as the race enters its final days.
What he stands for, I agree with. I agree with immigrants coming in the legal way. I agree with life, pro-life. I agree with his stand with the Air Force or the military. I have a son who's in the Army, and I believe that he will keep supporting my son there while he fights for our country.
The speakers at this rally say there's a false narrative during elections that says African Americans must vote for Democrats. Clark grew up hearing that same message, but made the switch to the Republican Party in 2008 when Barack Obama ran for president.
I was told vote for him because he's black. I didn't do that then, and I'm not doing it now. I'm not gonna, it's more than that. It's not about your color. It's about what you're gonna do when you're in office. Trump has proved what he's doing. He stands by what he says. He drained the swamp.
But most national polls of voters who are black show a strong support for Joe Biden at nearly 85%, while Donald Trump's poll numbers with black voters hover around the low teens. The Pew Research Center says 2020 could have the highest turnout of black voters in U.S. history, with about 30 million black people eligible to vote. In Ohio, there are about 1 million eligible black voters, making up about 12% of the state's electorate. National reports indicate black voters, especially black women, can make or break this presidential election in swing states. Among people of color, the second largest group of voters in Ohio are Hispanic and Latinx, with more than 241,000 people eligible to vote. That's about 2.7% of the total voting population. Jose Luis Mas, with the Ohio Hispanic Coalition, says in their voter engagement programs, they hear three big issues raised: immigration, education, and health care. As Mas explains, Hispanic voters can bring a different elections perspective, such as those who have immigrated from Latin American countries.
Now, those individuals are citizens of the United States, and they would have some ideas concerning universal health care and the responsibilities of the government.
Biden tends to lead Trump in polls among Hispanic voters by a 20 to 30 point margin, while Trump maintains about a third of the support among this group of voters. Of course, no racial group votes with one voice, and Mas says that's especially relevant among Latinx American immigrants who come from various countries with different government structures and religious beliefs. For example, Mas believes the ties between Latinx and the Catholic Church play a role in embracing Trump on his anti-abortion stance. Other voters who have immigrated from countries controlled by socialists have said that's why they support Trump. Asian Americans make up about 1% of Ohio's electorate. Elaine Tsao is CEO of Asian Services in Action, or ASIA, which provides health and human services to immigrant and refugee communities. For the election, ASIA has been working with groups like Asian American Pacific Islander Vote. She says the economy is a top issue among Asian American voters, many of whom own or work for small businesses. And the COVID-19 pandemic is bringing additional challenges, with reports of ramped up tension and aggression against Asian Americans. Trump has labeled it the China virus, the China plague, and has even used the racist term Kung Flu. Meanwhile, Asian unemployment is recovering at a slower rate than other groups.
Within the Asian community, there has been a significant backlash, just because of the narrative about the origins of the coronavirus, and community members that ASIA serves has felt that impact as well. So, that's another reason that the community members are extremely motivated this year more than ever to make sure that their voice is heard at the polls.
Making sure voices are heard is the driving force behind Kayla Griffin's group, All Voting is Local. She says the voter rights organization works to ensure that everyone has equal access to the ballot. That includes fighting to get extra drop boxes in Ohio's counties. Griffin says the one drop box per county rule disproportionately affects black voters. 78% of that population lives in the sixth most populated counties. While the battle for equal access is ongoing, Griffin has a message to the people who might feel disheartened.
If you are discouraged, the first tool that you have is voting. I say voting is the front door to the mansion of democracy. You cannot anticipate equity or equality in your community or for your folks if you are not engaging every tool necessary.
That's the spirit echoed in Daniel Shepard at the Franklin County Early Voting Center, who says the weather won't stop him from handing out sample ballots to voters.
Rain or shine, I'm going to be out here giving out these ballots.
Andy Chow, State House News Bureau.
And that is it for this week. For my colleagues at the State House News Bureau of Ohio Public Radio and Television, thanks for watching. Please check out our website at statenews.org. And you can also follow us and the show on Facebook and Twitter. Tune in to your local public radio station for updates leading up to and including election night and the day after. And we'll have analysis of what happened and why on the state of Ohio next week. We leave you with a few seasonal images seen in our travels throughout Ohio. A pro-Biden one from Republican Lancaster, a pro-Trump display from Democratic Westerville, and a Halloween scene starring a major character from 2020, the coronavirus.
Support for the statewide broadcast of The State of Ohio comes from Medical Mutual, providing more than 1.4 million Ohioans peace of mind with a selection of health insurance plans. Online at medmutual.com/Ohio. By the law offices of Porter Wright Morris and Arthur LLP. Now with 8 locations across the country, Porter Wright is a legal partner with a new perspective to the business community. More at porterwright.com. And from the Ohio Education Association, representing 124,000 members who work to inspire their students to think creatively and experience the joy of learning. Online at ohea.org.